सौवेद संहारं
नैवासौवेद संहारं
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्री भगवानुवाच
श्री भगवानुवाच
एतेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
ब्रह्मास्त्रं प्रदर्शिते
ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
नैवासु वेदसंहारं
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं
प्राणबद्ध उपस्थिते
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच एतेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम् नैवासौ वेदसंहारं प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते। श्रीभगवानुवाच एतेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम् नैवासौ वेदसंहारं प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
प्रदर्शितम्
ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
वेदसंहारं
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच
पुत्रस्य
वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
प्रदर्शितम्
ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
नैवासु वेदसंहारं
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच
एतेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
नैवासो वेदसंहारं
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच
वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
ब्रह्मास्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
ब्राह्मणम् अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते। Online? श्रीभगवानुवाच वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य ब्रह्मास्त्रं प्रदर्शितम् नैवासौ वेदसंहारं प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य ब्राह्मणमस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम् नैवासौ वेदसंहारं प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते।
श्रीभगवानुवाच
श्रीभगवानुवाच
एतेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
वेदेदं द्रोणपुत्रस्य
अस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
ब्राह्मणमस्त्रं प्रदर्शितम्
संहारं
नैवासौ वेदसंहारं
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते
प्राणबाधा उपस्थिते। What meaning? Sri Bhagavan, the Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Supreme Personality of Godhead.
Uvacha said,
Said,
Veta,
Veta,
just know from me,
just know from me,
idam, this, Drona Putrasya,
Putrasya,
of the son of Drona,
of the son of Drona,
Brahmam Astram,
Brahmanastram,
hymns of the Brahma,
names of the Brahma,
nuclear weapon,
nuclear weapon,
Pradarshritam,
Shriram,
exhibited,
exhibited,
Na, not, Eva,
Eva,
even,
even,
Aso,
Aso,
he,
he,
Veda,
Eva,
know it,
Noe,
Samaharam,
Samara,
retraction,
Retraction,
Pranabadhe,
Anubhavi,
extinction of life,
extinction of life,
Upasthite,
Upasthite,
being imminent.
imminent.
Translation prepared by His Divine Grace A.C. Bhaktivedanta Swami Srila Prabhupada. Translation. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said, know from me that this is the act of the son of Drona. He has thrown the hymns of nuclear energy, Brahmastra, and he does not know how to retract the glare. He has helplessly done this, being afraid of imminent death. Translation with repetition. The Supreme Personality of Godhead said,
Supreme Personality of Godhead said,
know from me
know from me
that this is the act
that this is the act
of the son of Drona.
of the son of Drona.
He has thrown
He has thrown
the hymns of nuclear energy,
the hints of nuclear energy,
Brahmastra,
Brahmastra,
and he does not know
and he does not know
how to retract the glare.
how to retract the blade.
He has helplessly done this,
He has helplessly done this,
being afraid of
being afraid of
imminent death.
imminent.
Perfect. The Brahmastra is similar to the modern nuclear weapon manipulated by atomic energy. The atomic energy works wholly on total combustibility, and so the Brahmastra also acts. It creates an intolerable heat similar to atomic radiation. But the difference is that the atomic bomb is a gross type of nuclear weapon, whereas the Brahmastra is a subtle type of weapon produced by chanting hymns. It is a different science, and in the days gone by, such science was cultivated in the land of Bharatavarsha. The subtle science of chanting hymns is also material, but it has yet to be known by the modern material scientists. Subtle material science is not spiritual, but it has a direct relationship with the spiritual method, which is still subtle. The chanter of hymns knew how to apply the weapon as well as how to retract it. That was perfect knowledge. But the son of Dronacharya, who made use of this subtle science, did not know how to retract. He applied it, being afraid of his imminent death. And thus, the practice was not only improper, but also irreligious. As the son of a Brahmana, he should not have made so many mistakes. And for such gross negligence of duty, he was to be punished by the Lord himself. Thus ends the Transcendental Bhaktivedanta purport. Om Ajnanatimirandasya Jnananjana Shalakya Chakshurunmilitam Yena Tasmai Shri Guruve Namaha Nama Om Vishnu Padaya Krishna Pristhaya Bhutale Srimate Bhaktivedanta Swami Niti Namine Namaste Saraswate Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesha Shunyavadi Pashyat Deshatarine Jai Shri Krishna Chaitanya Prabhu Nityananda Shri Advaita Gadadhara Shri Vasadi Gaura Bhakta Vrinda Hare Krishna 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 Hare 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 Rama 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 Hare Hare. Hare Krishna. So we are in the seventh chapter and almost towards the later section of this chapter, almost half. We have crossed half part of this chapter. And before we actually look into today's words, I thought we will just briefly see in what part of this chapter are we, the son of Drona punished. So it's for the first time we are coming very closer to see why and what is the reason for the punishment of the son of Drona, Ashwatthama. So if you look at the very beginning of this chapter, we see that it begins with a question from Shaunaka Rishi to Sutta Goswami. It begins with a question that sage Narada instructed Vyasadeva as what he should do, how he can overcome his despondency. And then we saw that glorification of the Lord, free from tinges of any materialism, and the instruction to glorify the Lord purely in the form of Srimad Bhagavatam was the instruction by Narada Muni. And having heard this, what did sage Vyasadeva do? So that was the beginning question, and then we saw how, after hearing the instructions from the sage Narada, Vyasadeva sits on meditation, and when he sits on meditation, he sees that the form of the Lord, Sri Krishna, and he also sees the material energy. And he also sees that the material energy is the cause for because of the living entity being influenced by the material energy, external energy, the living entity is suffering. And then recognizing that, what is the solution for this? So this is one quality of saintly people, that they are very, very compassionate. So they're always thinking of the welfare of all the living beings. Lokanam hitakaranam. They're always thinking, what is the welfare activity for all the living beings? And thinking in that way, he starts compiling Srimad Bhagavatam. So that is the beginning section of this chapter. And then again, Shaunaka Rishi starts asking furthermore questions about when Shukadeva Goswami Vyasadeva compiled Srimad Bhagavatam, he also instructed his son on the subject matter of the Srimad Bhagavatam. So then the question was asked by Shaunaka Rishi again, and Shukadeva Goswami is already liberated. Why does he need to learn all this complicated subject, vast subject of Srimad Bhagavatam? And then we saw the description of Atma Ramas, how they take pleasure, even they may be liberated, but the glories of the transcendental attributes of the Lord is so great that even a liberated person relishes them, because the Lord's glories are so unlimited, his attributes, his qualities are so wonderful that everyone likes, especially the devotees of the Lord, like to relish the transcendental glories of the Lord. And starting from there, there is also the discussion enters into understanding. Sutta Goswami further goes on to begin to explain that he says, Shaunaka Rishi, that I'm going to explain about the birth, activities, and deliverance of Maharaj Parikshit. So, in order to explain this question of the birth of Maharaj Parikshit, this discussion of what has actually happened immediately after the Kurukshetra war is being described. And in this section, we also see that in this chapter, where Ashwatthama killing the sons of Draupadi, who were all sleeping, and as soon as this was known, Arjuna became very, very furious. And he said that I would behead the Brahmana who did this. And immediately he starts chasing Ashwatthama. And as we saw, that Ashwatthama was so fearful. He could see that his life was in danger. And as soon as he saw that his life was in danger, out of fear for his life, he immediately touched his water, his hand with water, sanctified it, and then he started to chant the hymns and for throwing nuclear weapon. And so this is what has happened. And now he chants the hymns, and suddenly there's a glare of radiation. Now this is the situation, and then we saw in the last few verses, almost last 4 or 5 verses, Arjuna starts offering prayers. There is a huge glare, there is radiation because of the chanting of the hymns of nuclear weapon by Ashwatthama. And here, seeing this situation, Arjuna is not able to understand what's happening here. And he is starting to offer prayers. And this is very instructive to see the beautiful prayers of Arjuna. And there are so many instructions that we have been learning through the prayers of Arjuna. But I just thought we'll take a look into 2 aspects that will be relevant for us to see how those prayers are relevant for us and how the Lord is now responding to those prayers offered by Arjuna. So one of the aspects of offering prayers or approaching or so one of the first things that we see Arjuna does is that he immediately accepts the authority of Krishna. So as we saw in different prayers, in different verses, we saw Arjuna immediately saying, Krishna, Krishna, Mahabhava. So he who is the Almighty, he who is the Supreme. So this is a very important principle that someone has to accept an authority. Accepting authority is not an easy thing. It's actually in the cycle of evolution, there are so many species, but even in the human species, there are so many different varieties, but not all of them accept authority. Even to come to a point to understand that one has to accept an authority is very, very difficult for most people. In fact, it is said this is the one difference between the demigods and the asuras, or even so-called people living in this planet Earth. So accepting authority is a big challenge for most of us. But it is said that without accepting authority, we cannot make progress in our spiritual life. In fact, not even in spiritual life, even in our normal material lives. We accept some authority. And Arjuna, being greatly knowledgeable devotee of the Lord, is able to recognize the absolute authority, the supreme authority, Krishna. And he immediately is attributing, his stating that Deva Deva, the Lord of the Lords. So this is one very important principle where we need to accept the authority of the Lord. And there are so many people in this world who say, what is the need? There are a large section of atheistic people who say there is no need to accept any authority. You can see here, only sheep need a shepherd. Theology, there's mistake. So in this way, there's a large section of education that is being propagated today is to not accept any authority. And in this way, people are misguided. And not accepting authority has so many consequences that they entangle the living entity more and more in the complexities of material lives. Similarly, there are Buddhists who do not accept the authority of the Vedas. So there are different levels of not accepting authority. So the atheists do not want to accept any authority. Buddhists do accept some authority, but they do not accept the authority of the Vedas. And then there are the Mayavadi philosophers who accept Vedas as an authority, but they act opposite to the instructions of the Vedas. So, in fact, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu says this is even more dangerous than the Buddhists. At least Buddhists openly agree that we disagree with the Vedas, but Mayavadis, they say that we agree with the Vedas, yet they act contrary to that. So, in this way, we can see that there are so many kinds of people who do not accept authority, especially the absolute authority of the Vedic literatures as given by bona fide acharyas. And this creates havoc in the life of people. This doesn't allow one to reach the supreme destination. So, but that is not the case of a devotee. The devotee immediately recognizes he is willing to accept the authority and is willing to approach the authority. So this is second important principle, that unless we do not accept an authority, we will never approach an authority. So here you can see Arjuna through his prayers is approaching the authority. As soon as he is saying it clear, he is saying that there is something very terrible is happening here. What should I do? He is unable to understand it. And he's, as we saw in the last verse, it says, Tejaha Paramadarunam. It is, the effulgence is very, very dangerous. The dangerous effulgence is spreading everywhere. And Arjuna is not able to make sense of this. What is happening here? So immediately he says, Kim idam svit kuto vedi. So immediately he's asking the Lord, where does it come from? So this is another very important principle that we see here, is that to approach an authority, especially when we are unable to resolve the issue, we should always approach an authority, because without approaching authority, we do not acquire true knowledge. Therefore, accepting and approaching authority is a basic way to acquire knowledge. As we see that with the Pranipatena Pariprashnena Sevaya. So we have to go and inquire from a bona fide spiritual master. Tad Vijnanatham Sa Gurumeva Abhigacchayat. Especially for the matters of spiritual life, there is no other alternative. Sometimes people ask, why do you need a spiritual master? I will worship the Lord directly. But where do you have the knowledge to understand who the Lord is and how should you worship him? That is only available through his bona fide mercy representative, the spiritual master. Therefore, in a humble state of attitude, humble state of mind, one should approach an authority to seek knowledge, and also the knowledge in times of crisis. Even more so in the time of crisis, rather than doing something whimsically and aggravate the problem, it is always appropriate and right thing to do is to approach the authorities. And this is one common theme that we also see in Bhagavatam in various places, where especially we see the demigods approaching Srila Dakshai Vishnu. When they see, headed by Brahma, they approach the Lord, seeing the terrible condition of planet Earth. The mother cow was so aggrieved by the various sinful activities being performed. And when she approaches Brahma, the demigods, they all go to approach the Lord Vishnu. So similarly, in various instances, we also see the other demigods, they all approach Brahma, and Brahma then approaches the Lord. So similarly, we can see just when Jaya and Vijaya, they fell from the spiritual world, and they were placed in the womb of Diti, there was a terrible darkness which was kind of enveloping the universe. And all the demigods were so fearful. They saw, what is this happening? In today's verse, there is a glowing effulgence. In that case, it was a darkness. And immediately fear engulfed them. And they immediately approached Brahma asking, what is to be done? So in this way, we see this one common principle that all the demigods follow is that they accept the authority and approach the authority. And what happens, and Prabhupada writes in this purport, the difference between the demigods and ordinary human beings is that the demigods approach authority, whereas the inhabitants of this earth defy authority. If people would only approach the authority, then every adverse condition in this universe would be rectified. The Prabhupada is saying every adverse condition in this universe would be rectified. And Prabhupada actually explains this idea of approaching authority in multiple different contexts and different places. In one place, which Prabhupada often repeats, the same principle is that if the politicians of the world approach the saintly authorities, then so-called political problems, the geopolitical problems of the world will vanish. So lack of authority, lack of knowing and accepting and approaching an authority is creating havoc in all spheres of life. And therefore, Prabhupada would constantly, when he would meet some of the politicians or leaders, he would always recommend them to look into the instructions of the scriptures. And Prabhupada always used to say, we can provide you with the instructions and guidance of how to rule the society, how to conduct the affairs of the government from the Vedic principles. And that would immediately lead to a condition which is peaceful, which is progressive. But otherwise, it would only lead to more and more adverse conditions, as we see in today's world. The conclusive instruction of this incident, that is that of the darkness which is engulfing the universe, is that we may be disturbed as a material condition, but if we approach the authority and actually explain the matter, then our problem is solved. So this is what is happening here. Arjuna is seeing that this is a disturbing condition, and he is immediately approaching the Lord, and we will see how this problem will be solved. And we very much know from Bhagavad Gita how he had a similar material condition, disturbing material condition, to kill his cousins, grandfather, teachers, and how, again at that point of time, Arjuna approached the Lord. He surrendered unto the Lord. He asked, what is the ultimate good to do? What is the right thing to do? What is my dharma? So this approach is the beginning of spiritual life. And in this way, we make actual advancement and we solve all kinds of different problems. So this is a very instructive situation that we are seeing here. The Lord, Arjuna is approaching the Lord. And now we can also see that the Lord is very, very merciful. He's all-knowing. He's all merciful. So as soon as there is a sincere prayer of the devotee, as soon as someone approaches the Lord, as soon as even one approaches the spiritual master, one is assured of protection. Just like we see, even when Kali personified approaches Maharaj Parishit gives protection. As soon as there is surrender from the Kali Purusha. Similarly, when we surrender and when we offer sincere prayers, we immediately see the protection of the Lord. Lord provides us with knowledge, with ability, with strength, with whatever is necessary to overcome the so-called obstacle. And not only obstacles, but also help us advance in our ultimate perfection of developing our relationship with the Lord, knowing the Lord. So here we see Sri Bhagavan Vacha. So immediately the Lord is responding after the prayers offered by Arjuna that what is this cause? Where is this effulgence coming from? The Lord is immediately saying that just know from me that this effulgence is coming because of the act of the son of Drona. So Drona Putrasya, so because of his chanting the hymns of nuclear energy from Mastra, that this glare is coming. And one aspect, there are two aspects which I've mentioned, that significant is that he has done this helplessly, being afraid of imminent death. So this is another thing when there is a complex situation, if a troublesome situation, we all tend to act whimsically, not knowing what is right and wrong. So here Ashwatthama also not thinking about is it the right thing to do, because you do not do these kind of things in a normal play or in a normal day activities. Just like Prabhupada says that Brahmastra or a nuclear weapon is not thrown just because there's a friendly fight between two people. No, because its consequences are so huge that it is only used very selectively, and there is no other resort when there is absolute necessity and there is true benefit because of using that actually avoids much more danger otherwise. Only in those cases one can use this Brahmastra or nuclear energy and so on and so forth. But without thinking any of these consequences, without paying any understanding of what would happen, just because he was afraid of his death, he just chanted these hymns of Brahmastra. And here we also see that Naivasau Veda Samharam. He did not also know how to retract the weapon. So it is said that the complete knowledge involves of not only understanding how to throw a weapon, but also how to retract it if required. But in this case, he only knew how to make this weapon work, but he did not know how to retract it. Now, so he has somehow or the other chanted the hymns, and there is a glare. And it's very interesting that in the purport, Srila Prabhupada elaborates significantly about the similarities between a nuclear weapon and a Brahmastra. So Prabhupada begins the purport by saying some of the similarities between the nuclear weapon and the Brahmastra. First one being it is driven by atomic energy. So even in this case of modern weapons, so this is like a warhead which is carrying a nuclear weapon, and then there is some sort of a chemical reaction that begins. There is some sort of an ignition that takes place, and then it creates a nuclear reaction. And that nuclear reaction, Prabhupada also mentions in the second line about the atomic energy works wholly on total combustibility. So it's a very interesting principle. Prabhupada is using this word. Actually, it is true because of the combustion, because of the initial ignition that sets forth the nuclear reaction, that a chain of reactions start taking place. And as soon as that happens, there is a great amount of energy that is generated. So Prabhupada is saying that just like here, the chemical process is generating this mechanism of creating atomic combustibility and leading to the radiation, the glare. Prabhupada says similarly that the Brahmastra also works on a similar principle. So one of the things that happens that when nuclear weapon is released, how is that it is so effective or why it kills so many people? It is said it creates a great amount of nuclear radiation. So some people have done some studies and they have just analyzed what happens if a nuclear bomb is thrown in a city. So it is said, as we know, Hiroshima and Nagasaki, and the Pearl Harbor was attacked, that America resorted to an atomic bomb, and many thousands of people were killed. And similarly, today with more advanced technologies, they have made even more heavier, more powerful weapons. And it is said, if a nuclear bomb is released, within the 2-kilometer radius, there will be nothing which will be visible. In the sense, everything will be burned to ashes. The nuclear radiation and the energy would be so high that everything would be just burned down. And up to 11 kilometers, there will be, although the 2 kilometers are too severe, but up to 11 kilometers, people will not survive because of some other reasons, the heavy radiation, the heat, that people will die. And even beyond 11 kilometers, there will be third-degree burns, second-degree burns, first-degree burns, and there will be a strong wind of nuclear radiation, the dust particles, and all those things flying will lead to some more deaths. Such is the effect of a nuclear weapon. And here it has been said, so you can see it is not to be used always. And therefore, there are so many agreements that the governments have to follow to state that no, I cannot use this weapon whenever I want. There has to be no first deployment kind of agreement. Only if someone else is provoking me too much that I can use this, because it leads to a complete devastation. And Prabhupada is saying how that is very much similar, that the atomic radiation, the intolerable heat is generated similarly by the Brahmastra. So it is a great science. And here, the Prabhupada, after telling the similarities between the Brahmastra and the nuclear weapon, Prabhupada goes on to say the difference between Brahmastra and the nuclear weapon. So one aspect that Prabhupada says that is different is that the Brahmastra is not driven by a chemical process or a nuclear reaction, but rather it is driven by the subtle method of chanting hymns. So Prabhupada is emphasizing, elaborating the point that there is a gross material science and there is a subtle material science. So in the modern world, they're largely driven by this idea of gross material science, of manipulating matter on the gross platform. But they are not aware of the subtle material science. As we see from Bhagavad Gita, there are two kinds of energies. The gross material energy comprising of Bhumi, Apo, Analo, Kam, Mano, Buddhi, Kam, Mano, Kam, the ether. So each of these layers are finer than the other. And then comes the subtle matter, mind, intelligence, and ego. So today people are not very much aware of what is the effect of things which are more subtle. Even they don't even understand what exactly is mind, what exactly is intelligence, what exactly is false ego. It is not very well understood. And therefore, all the activities of the modern civilization is driven around gross material things, manipulating the gross material things. And they think that is all life is. And because they have no real conception of the subtle science of life. And it's also very interesting that Prabhupada says that the subtle science of chanting hymns is also material, but it has yet to be known by the modern material scientists. So Prabhupada is saying, because it is so subtle than the gross, it is not known to the material scientists yet. And Prabhupada further goes on to bring in a very significant point, very interesting point, is that subtle material science is not spiritual, but it has a direct relationship with the spiritual method. So Prabhupada, as we were saying in the Yoga Sutras, how mind is an subtle element. It has direct relationship with the spiritual, the spirit soul. Although it is material, it is being subtler as a relationship with the soul. Similarly, as we have heard, that intelligence is the next door of the spirit, or the consciousness. So false ego is also so much related to the spirit soul. So these subtle elements are very, very closely associated with the spiritual aspects. And Prabhupada says that forget that they are not able to understand the subtle elements, material elements. How will they understand which is even more subtler, the spirit soul? And Prabhupada states that because modern science does not understand the subtle science, they cannot understand what happens to a person when he dies. Because we see only grossly there is some change in terms of his heartbeat or something. But Prabhupada says they cannot understand that how is subtle bodies actually taking the soul and leading him to get another body. This is more subtle science. And not knowing this, there is so much of turbulence and confusion in the society as to what is the real value of life, what one should do at the time of death, what is the goal of life. This is all unknown. And therefore, as we saw earlier, approaching an authority is a necessity, is a must. Only then we can actually acquire this subtle and subtler sciences. Otherwise, one will remain in the gross understanding of the world and will go on applying only gross aspects of knowledge in the daily life and other places. So, moving on from there, we also see that here Prabhupada then goes on to explain that the son of Drona, as a son of Brahmana, he should not have made so many mistakes. But even before that, he said, Prabhupada says, he applied it being afraid of his imminent death. Thus, the practice was not only improper, but also irreligious. So, this is another very important principle that any action should be governed by the scriptural injunctions, Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. So, it is very important that our actions should be governed by these principles. Whether is it approved by the Guru, Sadhu, and Shastra. If it is not, one should refrain from doing it. Because, as we know, there are three kinds of activities: karma, vikarma, and akarma. So, the vikarma, which is against the principles of the Vedic scriptures, against the principles of the Sadhu and Shastra, Guru and Sadhu and Shastra, they lead to hellish consequences. They lead to more troublesome life. On the other hand, the karma, which is to act on the basis of the scriptures, yet not working with the pure intention to serve the Lord, yet following for a material gain. That is considered better than vikarma, yet it is not free from the reaction of the material nature. Therefore, we have to be very, very analytical and careful when we act. We have to see through the lens of the scriptures, through the instructions of the authority, whether is this a bona fide action? Am I doing correct? Am I doing the right thing? Or am I doing mental concoction? Because mental concoction is such a common phenomenon that is surrounding all of us that we forget to recognize the authority and the instructions of the authority. And therefore, out of our whimsical mind, we concoct different reasons, different duties, different activities, and which sometimes may fall in the category of devotional service, but not really in the sense of pure devotional service, of really pleasing the authorities and really making rapid advancement in spiritual life. If we give up this mental concoction and really render service the way as instructed or as desired by the authorities, then they are pleased much more. As soon as they're pleased, then the devotional service fructifies very quickly. The results of devotional service, of transformation in our heart, the progressive knowledge of the Lord, and further eagerness to render devotional service very quickly comes. So here, Ashwatthama did not think about any of these things, whether it is a right act, not a right act. He didn't think of any of these things, just to perform the activity. Then it is also important to see that Prabhupada ends this purport by saying, as a son of a Brahmana, he should not have made so many mistakes. for such gross negligence of duty, he was to be punished by the Lord himself. And as we saw, the title of today's class is titled Gross Negligence of Duty. So this is another very important aspect to understand what is the gross negligence of duty and what constitutes duty. Although it's a quite an intense, big topic, we'll briefly take a look into it, and we will see how this is another important characteristic or difference between humans and animals. Especially in today's civilization, and even more so in the Western civilization, there is an idea of freedom. There is an idea of inclusivity and so on and so forth. But they never talk about the idea of being responsible. It is creating havoc in the lives of people, especially the young people. They're not being taught how to be responsible, how to perform their duties. All that people want to do is, you should give me this, you should give me that, you should give me this. But I don't want to do anything for anything in the world. So lack of responsibility is a sign of degraded consciousness. So animals take no responsibility, but humans have a responsibility. Now, what kind of responsibility? Now, that is also very important to understand. Yet, in the modern discourse, we don't hear any of these things of being responsible, being dutiful. What is the right duty is never spoken or understood. And because this is not understood, people act whimsically. Whatever pleases them, they start acting based on that knowledge. And that is creating so many unwanted problems. And Bhagavad Gita describes that there are actually two kinds of duties. One is the swadharma, and one's own occupation, which is based on either being a brahmana, vaishya, kshatriya, shudra. So based upon this classification, based upon basically one's own natural inclination, there's a classification of one's own occupation duties. So especially when one is not liberated, as we will see, Bhagavad Gita, in the second chapter, the Lord, when he's instructing Arjuna to fight, one of the reasons that Lord gives is that this is your specific duty to fight. As a Kshatriya, you have a duty, you have an obligation to perform. And as we also see in the very beginning of the second chapter, the Lord uses the word Arya. So one who knows the progressive values of life. So usually people are not very much aware what is the goal of life, what does progression in life mean. And therefore, they do not know how to base their activities. But Aryans who are interested in the progressive values of life, they are very careful about their duty, because they know if they don't act rightfully, they are going to go downwards towards hellish conditions or unwanted consequences. And therefore, they are very, very careful that I do not want to be overcome with miserly weakness and suffer unwantedly. Rather, they always wanted to make progress in their life. This is the characteristic of Aryan civilization. That always progress. And progress means to render duty, to perform one's duties. And therefore, we see throughout Bhagavad Gita, there is always the description of perform your duty, perform your duty, perform your duty. The instruction is again and again given. Now, on the basic level, the basic duty is that everyone should perform one's occupational duty based upon the social classification of one falling one of these four classifications based on one ashrama dharma. Now, what does this do? Why is this so important? Because one is that the idea of duty itself is not present in most people. The spiritual duty is much farther idea. To serve the Lord, whom I cannot see, is much more difficult idea for many people to understand. They say, how do you know a Lord exists? How do you know anything is true? Why should I serve the Lord? How do I know if there is any benefit serving the Lord? So at least if you're not able to reach that level immediately, okay, start off with at least performing your duty rightfully. Don't be a deceitful cheater. Don't cheat. That's why we see another place where an honest speaker is considered much more better than a deceitful so-called sadhu. So again and again we see Bhaktisiddhanta Saraswati Maharaj and Srila Prabhupada explaining that do your occupation honestly. That is better than being cheating in the name of the Lord and making some occupation out of so-called rendering service. That is not permissible. So, okay, if not about spiritual things, on a material platform, learn to do your duty very well. That will develop a sense of responsibility, a sense of, especially when it is governed by the social construct, the Brahmanas headache. So Brahmanas give the direction. And on the basis of that, the Kshatriyas are governing the kingdom. And they are saying who is following the religious principles and who is not following the religious principles. In Prabhupada would often say that the duty of the Kshatriya is to see, oh, you are saying you are a Hindu? Are you following the principles of Hinduism? Or are you following the principles of Islam and Christianity? So the administrator has to see that are they really following the principles of religion? And so just because, you see, when they're hearing from the instructions of a Brahmana who are knowledgeable in the Vedic literatures, now they are giving the right instructions to Kshatriyas, and they are making sure that the system is being followed. And similarly, the Vaishyas, because of good administration, they are able to flourish, and the Shudras, they're also being engaged. And in this course of the social interaction, they're also the Brahmanas, the sages, the learned acharyas, they engage the entire society in rendering service to the Lord. So in this way, the Varnashrama system is so made that even by doing one's own duties, one is actually engaging in the service of the Lord. Some more directly, some less directly, but yet everyone is using their ability, propensities in the service of the Lord. And in this way, one very quickly makes advancement and becomes progressive. Therefore, rendering one's own duties is so much important. And we see in this Bhagavad Gita chapter 2, there is this 31st verse, which is very nice and purport by Srila Prabhupada. It's just very brilliant purport. So dharmam api chavekshya na vikam titum arhasi karmyadhi vidyat shreyonya kshatriyasya na vidyate. Considering your specific duty as a Kshatriya, you should know that there is no better engagement for you than fighting on religious principles. And so there is no need for hesitation. So it is very important that one should, Lord is emphasizing that you should do your duty as a Kshatriya. If you're not thinking on the platform of soul, that's okay. At least at this point, let's take this even on the principle of just being a Kshatriya. You should still fight, you should do your duty. So sometimes the idea that devotees have no duties, it's not true. In fact, they have more duties. The idea that one who becomes a devotee, he will become nalayak, he will not be able to do anything, it's not true. He actually becomes more and more responsible. The more one becomes Krishna conscious, the more one becomes responsible. And not only one in this case is talking, one is talking about the material duties of what one has to do based on the circumstance of the societal position in which one is existing, but also a devotee also executes another kind of a duty. And that is the duty of devotional service. So, one, there are two kinds of swadharmas or specific duties. As long as one is not liberated, one has to perform the duties of that particular body in accordance with religious principles in order to achieve liberation. When one is liberated, one's swadharma, specific duty, becomes spiritual and is not in the material bodily concept. In the bodily concept of life, there are specific duties for the brahmanas, kshatriyas, respectively, and such duties are unavoidable. So, Srila Prabhupada also, because it is not very easy for one to give up one's own occupational duties and switch to the swadharma of spiritual duties. So, it also requires a transition. And the spiritual master is very, very expert to guide one as how one can engage one's so-called occupational duties and then help one further make progress and eventually lead one to act on a spiritual platform. So as devotees, we don't only have the normal duties of performing the various kinds of duties, but we also have this duty of rendering devotional service, the spiritual duty. And although it's as it is said that the basic human civilization makes advancement, or there is meaning to the human civilization when there's classification and there is duty-bound activity that everyone is performing. And gradually, by performing this, one Prabhupada says in the last statement here, discharging one's specific duty in any field of action in accordance with Varnashrama Dharma serves to elevate one to a higher status of life. So even when we are given various responsibilities and services, they help us progress. They help us progress in our devotional lives. And for devotees, the even more important duty is that dharma svanastitra pumsam vishwaksena katha suyha notpadyat yadi rati shramaye vahi kevalam. So if by doing our occupational duties, if we are not developing attachment to hear about the Lord, to get closer to render devotional service to the Lord, then all that work that we are doing is Shamaivahi Kevalam. So while we are doing various duties, we must not be negligent of our ultimate duty, the spiritual duty. So in the case of here, we see that the Lord is punishing Ashwatthama for the negligence of his duty. Being a Brahmana, he is not supposed to do these kind of whimsical activities. And he has been doing again and again, killing the 5 sons, and now doing another mischievous act of throwing a Brahmastra. Now the Lord is punishing. Similarly, we are punished by the laws of material nature. So if we do not act for our ultimate well-being, that is to engage in devotional service, and also to use all our occupational engagements in the service of the Lord. How do we use? Everything should be centered to get step forward in devotional life. Even if we work, even if we do anything, there has to be progress towards developing attachment to the Lord, to be able to render service to the Lord. And one more aspect that Srila Prabhupada often says, that what is the difficulty? In the earlier times, the difficulty was that you have to undergo so much of tapasya in order to make spiritual progress. You have to, Prabhupada gives the example of yogis in hot summer, they're just putting fire around them and trying to do tapasya. Or in cold winter, they're putting themselves under water to neck deep, and then they're trying to meditate. So many difficulties they have to undergo. But Prabhupada says, Chaitanya Mahaprabhu has given us a simple tapasya to chant, dance, and feast. So Prabhupada says that our simple duty is to chant 16 rounds of Hare Krishna Mahamantra, dance in front of the deities, and take Krishna Prasadam. And Prabhupada says we are so fallen that we are not even able to execute the simple duty. Then where is the question of getting perfection? Where is the question of being liberated? Prabhupada in many places says the method that is given by Chaitanya Mahaprabhu for spiritual liberation, ultimate perfection, is so simple and susukam kartum avyayam. it is all blissful. So there is the highest gain, and the process is all joyous. And our simple duty is to chant, as we saw, Bolo Krishna, Bhajo Krishna, Koro Krishna, Sri Krishna. So we have to chant the name of the Lord, do some service in helping spread the mission of Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Srila Prabhupada, and take nice Krishna Prasadam. So it's such a simple duty that we all have to chant, feast, and spread the holy names. So if we engage in all this, we will not be punished by the material nature, but rather will be blessed by Srila Prabhupada and Lord Chaitanya Mahaprabhu, Nityananda Prabhu, which will make life all joyful and happy. I'll stop here and see if there are any questions or comments.
Hare Krishna, Prabhu.
Hare Krishna.
Prabhu, you have mentioned like we should be careful when we